This episode of Radcast Outdoors is brought to you by PK Lures, Bow Spider, and High Mountain Seasonings.
Fish on! Hey, Radcast is on.
Hunting, fishing, and everything in between. This is Radcast Outdoors. Here are David Merrill and Patrick Edwards.
Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of Radcast Outdoors. I'm Patrick Edwards.
And I'm David Merrill.
And we're back in the studio with a good friend of mine, Mr. John Bass, Superintendent of State Parks at Boyson State Park. So welcome to the show, man.
Man, glad to be here.
It's good to have you back. Yeah. We've been talking about this episode for a while, too, because the three of us, I would classify as pronghorn antelope nuts or speed goat nuts. And so we're going to talk about speed goats today. And Wyoming, I would argue, is probably the best place in the entire country for pronghorn hunting. And so, John Bass, welcome to the episode, and glad to have you on to talk about pronghorn and / speed goats.
Yeah, everybody calls them antelope, pronghorn. I love hunting them. I mean, you'd ask me to do this. You're like, we should do a podcast. What could we do one about? And I said, man, let's talk about pronghorn hunting. I hadn't heard y'all do a podcast about that very much. And I was like, count me in, I'll do it, And we were talking earlier that, I moved out here from Tennessee in 2017, but not my first time to Wyoming. When I first time to Wyoming, I actually worked in Yellowstone National Park back in 2001 when I was in college. And then my next trip to Wyoming was in 2009 on my first out of Tennessee hunting trip. I grew up hunting wild turkeys, eastern wild turkeys, and white-tailed deer. And me and my brother and three of my good buddies decided to all load up and drive across the country, put in for tags, and come pronghorn hunting, and hunted around a place called Mule Creek Junction. Y'all ever heard of it? It's right over the South Dakota border. And I'll talk about it now. We actually went on a walk-in area there because me and my wife went back a couple of years ago, and since Onyx, that place has kind of got inundated. But this was pre-Onyx. That should be a hunting term, is pre-Onyx.
Yeah,
pre-Onyx.
It's a real deal.
Yes. Yeah, it's a real deal for especially walk-in areas and stuff like that.
You had to do homework. You had to do research. You had to print maps, and you had to really figure out, how am I going to get onto this square?
Yeah, print map on a piece of paper, and then I outlined the walk-in area with red and highlighted it, and I was like, okay, we're putting all of our eggs in this basket, right? And we had no idea what to expect. Okay, so we ended up driving to Edgemont, South Dakota. Y'all want to hear this whole story?
Yeah. Yes, I want to hear it.
So we ended up driving to Edgemont, South Dakota. We stayed in Edgemont, drove into Wyoming because it's just over the border. And so we're a bunch of whitetail hunters from Tennessee, right? So what do we have to do? We're hunting pronghorn. We have to be there before daylight, like a whitetail hunter.
Yeah, of course.
Of course. That's what we need. Yeah. So we had actually drove in the afternoon before because we got there. It's a 24-hour drive from Tennessee. And we got there, and we had not seen any pronghorn. I mean, we crossed into Wyoming. We're still not seeing any. And we got to that walk-in area, and boom, there's a buck. There's another buck. There's some does. There's another buck. Like, hey, they're here. They're actually on this walk-in area. And so we kind of set a game plan, went back to Edgemont, about a 45-minute drive, in a little motel there. It was called the Rainbow Motel at the time. I think it's the Cowboy Inn now. There's only one place to stay. And went back to the motel, and of course we got up next morning, and when we got up, I could hear the wind blowing before we went outside.
Oh yeah.
And so it was 60-mile-an-hour gusts with sustained at 40 miles an hour. Here we get in the truck. We take off in the dark into Wyoming to go on our first pronghorn hunt. And we're all like, what are we doing? So we had done plan where we was going to drop each other off at, these little cattle guard or fence areas. So we was all kind of split up. And me and my buddy was together. We had, a tag each. And I said, well, let's hunt together. You can have the first shot. Well, we was parked, sitting in the truck, kind of waiting for it to get a little bit daylight, and the truck is just rocking from this wind. I was like, how are we going to hit these things? They're going to have to be close. We'd all practice shooting, Well, anyway, so we got out of the truck, crossed the fence, and it was about 100 yards till it dropped off into kind of a big basin. And we walked that 100 yards, and as soon as we got to the crest, boom, there's a buck with a bunch of does at about 250 yards. But the wind is howling, and my buddy's shooting, I think he had I know I had my 7mm Magnum, and he had a 300 Win Mag, I think. We brought these giant guns to shoot these, less than whitetail deer. Yeah, a little too much. But I mean, you go hunting with what you're most confident in, right? Don't, the best shooting gun, the one you shoot the best, that's the one you take. You go on out-of-state hunt or a new hunt, don't buy a new gun and a new scope and try to set it up and take it. Get old trusty. That's what I always tell people. Anyway, so he set up, and he said, how much should I give for the wind? I like, man, 250 yards in this wind, I'd give it a foot. It's going to move it a foot, even at 300. And so he shot, and he thought he missed it, but it took off running, and I saw him fall. He went down. I said, no, you got him. And it was a pretty good, we didn't really know how to judge him. I think it ended up scoring in the mid-70s or whatever. So it was a great first one. And so as soon as he shot, I was like, we was excited, and then another one walked out, another buck come out kind of behind this little hump, how the desert prairie is. And I said, there's another one. And I had borrowed this rangefinder from my cousin. That was the only reason I knew what the range was, because in 2009, laser rangefinders were still kind of new. This was like this big thing. And so I ranged it, and it said 410. And he said, how much are you going to give for the wind? I said, I'm going to give him 3 feet. So I knew what my gun was shooting, so I brought it up over his back about 6 inches, brought it back to his butt, where his butt was, and squeezed off, and he hit the ground, just slapped the ground. It went right behind the shoulder, but that wind moved it 3 feet. I knew what it would do, but so you got to know what you got to do some practice, and we always talk about practice and shooting, and know what your gun's going to do, and try to guess what the wind's going to do. But it's pretty consistent. There's plenty of tables out there, and so we were just over the moon. The sun, technical sunrise hadn't even happened yet. We're tagged out on our bucks. We had doe tags too. Well, during this time, my buddy John, he shot a buck and his doe they got up out of their bed right as the day was breaking. He filled both tags in the first 5 minutes. My brother, I think he filled his the next morning or maybe that afternoon, but we filled all of our tags in less than 2 days. And so it was like, well, this is either really easy or we got really lucky. Doesn't matter. It was a lot of fun. And so we was kind of hooked on it. And we ended up coming back. God, I think we come back in 2011. Man, we ended up, how I ended up in Wyoming was we come back in 2016 with my father-in-law and one of my buddies and a couple other friends from Tennessee. And I was telling y'all earlier, the reason I'm in Wyoming is because of Pronghorn. And David kind of said the same thing. When I started thinking about it on the drive down, I was like, Pronghorn's a pretty important part of my life because, if I wouldn't have been on that pronghorn hunting trip in 2016, I would not have been up at the 10 Sleep Brewery. Mm-hmm. A little shout out to them, drinking their golden ale, which is actually called Speed Goat, named after Pronghorn. I was drinking golden ale and I met a friend through work that worked for Wyoming State Parks that was actually the superintendent at Medicine Lodge. And he drove over there, and we was having a beer, talking about how awesome Wyoming was. He's originally from Michigan. And I said, man, it's beautiful. I just need to move out here. And he said, well, they're looking for a superintendent down at Boysen State Park. Man, that's almost 7 years ago. Rest is history now.
Here you are.
Here I am. And I couldn't be happier. My wife and son, man, we go and adventure and hunt. And I sent you a picture earlier of her and him and me, and it's a family affair. That's what we'll talk about next, is how if you can draw a pronghorn tag in Wyoming, it's a very doable, very achievable hunt. It's very high success rates. As long as you can shoot, you should be able to fill the tag, and you should be able to find them. There's plenty of places, a lot of walk-in areas, a lot of public ground, and any alfalfa field, if you're getting desperate, gets to go knock on the farmer's door, they're going to say, yeah, go ahead, usually.
They're not going to give you permission for mule deer. Don't even ask. But you ask for a whitetail doe, or you say, hey, how about them antelope in there? You hunt antelope? Sure, go take 2 of them.
Yeah. They always wish you had more tags sometimes. So yeah, antelope's a very doable hunt. And I've had people ask me, even after that first year we come out here, and especially since moving out here, I've got a lot of hunting friends back home, and they're like, man, I want to come out there and kill an elk. And I'm like, well, that's a little bit different. That's a much more difficult hunt, harder to do, more time. And I said,
harder on your body.
Yeah, harder all the way around. But I said, you can really do a pronghorn hunt. I think that first year in 2009, and this was getting a shoulder mount too. I got it mounted up in Newcastle, and they shipped it back. But we did the tags, gas, fuel. Of course, everything was split: food, hotel, everything, and a shoulder mount. I had $1,100 in that hunt.
That's a great deal.
That just you just can't do that, you know. Of course, it's higher now. I mean, that was, God, that's 15 years ago almost. It makes me feel old.
But I mean, it's kind of interesting to hear you two talk about antelope and, you know, pronghorn and what that means to you. For me, being a Wyoming native, that's typically the first big game animal you go hunting for. It's either that or a deer, typically, right? And so when I was 12 years old, the very first animal that I shot was a real nice pronghorn buck at 300 yards. You know, that was my first animal. And so it has a special place in my heart as well, because it's like, that is kind of the beginning of my big game hunting, you know, journey. And they are one of the coolest animals on the planet. I was actually talking to a guy not too long ago about pronghorn, and he's trying to, you might have read the article, but he's trying to prove that pronghorn are actually faster than cheetahs. Because back when they did the test to test the speed of the cheetah, there were some things that, you know, are kind of questionable about it. And so he wants to actually have some kind of a, you know, modern day, you know, with all the new technology, a way to actually test and see who's faster, because he thinks pronghorn are faster. And he's like, Patrick, how fast do you think those things go? And I'm like, man, I've been driving down dirt road, you know, and they're passing me.
They're bound and determined. They're gonna run alongside you and cut you off and go in front of you.
Yeah,
and you can't, unless you've got a paved road, you ain't gonna beat them in a pickup.
Right, and they're fast. When you spook them, they get gone quick.
Oh yeah,
I mean, they put that distance on real fast.
So they're fast.
Right.
They have like no body fat on them. It's crazy. Whenever you do harvest one, it's really interesting to look at them, because they're just built for speed. They don't have a bunch of fat on them. Their hair is like hollow. They're just such a cool, unique animal, and they look like nothing else, right? Like you can say elk and mule deer at least have some of a similar build and, you know, similar antlers and stuff, but pronghorn are just so different and so fast, so cool looking. They are like my favorite big game animal in the state.
I'd be just fine, you know, starting my Western hunting with a pronghorn and then ending my Western hunting with it. It'd be the last thing I'd like to hunt. Yep. I mean, the hunt is if you'll be able to find some, and it's not like elk or you know, trophy mule deer. If you mess up your one opportunity that you might get on an elk or a trophy mule deer, that's it. That's wait till next year, buddy. I mean, that's a lot of times that's the case. Pronghorn, you mess up a stalk, something happens.
Show back up tomorrow.
Yeah, just be back tomorrow. He'll be back, you know, or drive a half mile down the road and find another one, you know. Right. So that's why it's a good beginner hunt, you know. But you know, us three sitting here, we're not beginner hunters, and we still love to hunt them. You know, it's a lot of fun, and the more you hunt them, the more, I guess, picky you can get, the better you get at judging them. And it's not about, for me, it's not about the trophy at all. I mean, the only reason I might let one go is so I can keep hunting them. It's not about a trophy on a wall, because the last good one I shot, its skull's still in the freezer waiting for me to European mount it, and that was 2 years ago. You know, it's not about the trophy. It's about the meat in the freezer, because we're going to talk about that too, about how delicious they are. And everybody out there that says that they ain't, I'm sorry that you've had a bad experience, but it was how it was treated from the time it hit the ground. But
or even before the time it hit the ground. You need to make a clean, quick harvest on them.
Quick harvest,
I've had one. I mean, we moved here and we drew an archery antelope tag. I say my wife and I were invited to come out and visit my father-in-law in 2006, 7, somewhere in there. And we came out here from Oregon before we moved to Alaska, and I was like, this place is cool, even back then. Mm-hmm. And I'd say bow spider probably wouldn't exist without pronghorn, without that hunt, right? Having been here, coming out of state, same thing you did. Wife and I hopped in a car, showed up here. Her dad catered all the food, everything. He'd gone out and pre-built archery blinds over water. We came for the archery opener, and boy, we brought one of those pop-up blinds. And it had rained, which made it a little more difficult the first couple days of the hunt, because there was water standing in the 2-track everywhere, and they didn't have to come to the water trade-offs. But we sweated it out one day in one of those pop-up blinds. And how I build them now, hog panel, canvas tarp, some plywood, and some burlap, and some T-posts. They breathe. You put them on the lee side of the wind from the water, and you'll get a little cool breeze off the pond. It's a waiting game, and a lot of people don't like it, but take a book. And what I like about doing it that way, I've taken 3-year-old kids, set them in the blind, give them binoculars. They love it. you got antelope 5 yards away. And once they come in that close, they're no longer spooky because they can see 500, 600, 700 yards away. So they've already confirmed that there's no danger there, so to speak. And they've committed to. Now they'll come stand 100 yards away and they'll stare for 10, 15 minutes. They're looking for a coyote. They're looking for something. And so you're in this little box. It's awesome. It's really cool.
It's funny that you said that because I've noticed that with pronghorn is like sometimes when they get real close, they're almost surprised that there's something moving that they didn't already know was there because of that long distance eyesight that they have. I mean, because I've been, you get 20, 30 yards from an antelope or pronghorn. I mean, they just kind of stand there and look at you with that look on their face of like, how did this big other animal get this close to me without me knowing it was here, and like trying to figure it out,
Yeah.
And I hear people say, wow, they're dumb. They're not dumb.
No.
They're just different. They're just
the ones along the highway act like they're not dumb. Get a mile off and step out of the pickup and see what they do.
Yeah.
Right. Or wait, not opening day or 2 weeks into the season. I was fortunate, me and my wife was fortunate enough to draw 2 buck pronghorn tags this year. And I usually like to wait till later in the season. I don't like the opening day of everybody driving around in the same area. I just wait because a lot of times if you'll wait till later in the season, the bucks that's been hanging out next to the road, those get harvested usually. And then later in the season, some older bucks or bucks from deeper off the road will come and they'll start tending those does. And that was, I've killed a couple of really nice ones just because of, just wait until later in the season. The weather's cooler,
Yes.
and that's archery elk season too, right, David? So it's I'll wait till 1st of October, first couple weeks of October before I try to fill that tag.
That's why I either archery hunt them during August when it's hot. So we've talked about this. You need to have coolers with ice and take care of that meat.
You gotta have it, yep.
But last year, my dad drew a tag right here around the house, and we went 2 or 3 days before season closed, and he killed an 85-inch goat.
Yep.
And people are like, oh, numbers. Okay, so the difference between a 60, a 70, a 80, and a 90, it's only 10 inches, right? But when you start adding an inch to a prong, an inch to a length, a couple inches to mass measurement, it's really hard to tell at distance the difference between a 72 and an 82, right? A 92 standing there is pretty easy. A 62 is pretty easy, but you get into that 70, 80-inch goat, they are one of the harder species to field judge and go, oh, I think he's...
Oh, yeah.
For sure.
And that's another good thing about what he's talking about. It's a good first if you're an out-of-state hunter, non-resident hunter coming in, because the difference between an average pronghorn and a trophy pronghorn is inches, right? It's not like on a mule deer where an average mule deer might be a 120 and a trophy one's a 170 or 180. That's a vastly different looking mount on your wall when you take it back to whatever state you're from. But a 65-inch antelope, it's going to look just fine on the wall when you get it back, and they're very common and not hard to achieve that.
Well, especially if you're taking it back east where there aren't pronghorn, you have it on your wall, people are going to be like, man, that's really cool.
Yeah, they're like, did you go to Africa to get that?
Some people think that, right? Because they're like, I haven't seen one of those before.
Well, that's why everybody calls them antelope, because first Europeans, when they saw them, they had been to Africa and they called them antelope, but they're not actually
related.
They're not related at all. Because an antelope, nothing is related to a pronghorn. They're at the end of their evolutionary chain. They had other relatives, but they've all become extinct.
They're their own thing.
They're their own thing. That's why some of the diseases out there doesn't affect them, that affect the other ungulates. And, they're the only horned animal that sheds.
It sheds, but it's not. The horn is more keratin and more fibrous. It's almost it's almost more like beard hair that grows together. But then they shed it off.
Yeah.
They are way cool.
I bet it would feel good to shed our beards off, David. Just shed it all at once and start growing it again.
For those of you watching on YouTube, we might have a little facial hair. It's Wyoming. It's I think mandatory.
It should be.
I don't know. Yeah. I had a beard before it was cool, though, so.
Yeah, me too, man. It's like, man, everybody's growing a beard now, but, But no, to that point, like, it is interesting that they shed that every year because, most horned animals, that's not what they're doing. And so... well, I don't think any of them do except for pronghorn, right?
Pronghorn's the only one I know of.
So it's crazy.
That sheds their horns.
I've been out in the springtime.
So for everybody out there, antlered animals like deer and elk, those are antlers, and moose.
Yep.
They shed every year and regrow them. But horned animals, horns stay like doll sheep. There you go, David. Like, so sheep, they just continually grow. But, they don't ever shed them. They don't ever shed those sheaths like a pronghorn does. And they'll shed them in... was it November, late October, early November? You'll start seeing them without them.
Yeah.
And they've got like a bony core on the inside. If anybody's ever done a European mount on one, you know what I'm talking about. But
They're like spikes.
like
of
spikes.
bone. Yeah.
And I've thought about that before. When they shed those things off in November and the wind's blowing and it's cold out here on the prairie, that's got to be sensitive, like a cavity in a tooth or something, there for a little while before it starts growing, But I don't know. Maybe it starts growing from the inside, and that it actually pushes that off. I don't know. That would be a question for a biologist.
I think that's the case, but I'm not sure. But that's what I've heard is that they start to regrow that next year's, horn, and it kind of pushes that other one off. But I've found those in the field, and it's weird. It's like, oh, that came off of a pronghorn,
Yeah, I find them every year, and great dog. The golden retriever loves them. And David was talking about earlier. He was showing me some of his pronghorn he has harvested, and he said, I've got a bunch of the left sides, but my dog ate all the right sides.
When we moved everything out to pour the cement, they got put, I think, in a file cabinet in the drawer, but then somehow the dog got into the pile, and she got all the rights. I have 3 lefts and I'm missing 3 rights, and one's one of my nice goats. And yeah,
it happens.
It happens. It doesn't matter at the end of the day. It's the trophies are in your mind. It's the experiences that we have doing it and who we get to do it with is what's the best part about it.
Well, it's like how you let off. It's the story. It's like the wind's rocking the truck and your bullet's moving 3 feet. That's the exciting part about a pronghorn hunt is and I've done some where the stock is also super cool, right? Because you may be, because of their binocular vision and you're rifle hunting them, they may be set up in a strategic spot where you can't make a very good stock, and it takes you a long time, and that's exciting and that's fun. And I did one with my buddy CJ. He'll probably listen to this, but him and his dad and I, we were making a stock on this really nice old pronghorn. And this is
what would you call an old pronghorn? How many years you think it is?
Oh my gosh,
this would be another good biologist question.
That is a good question, but you could tell because he was his base of his horns were just massive. I mean, just gigantic. Now, they weren't real glorious otherwise, but I mean, they were huge on the base. Like you could see just these massive horns coming out of his head.
As big as
they
these
weren't real
microphones.
tall. They weren't real tall, but they were real heavy. And CJ was like, that's the one I want. And they had water, they had food, they had everything they needed, and they could see for miles. We had to drive like 4 or 5 miles around, hike down this little crag. And then we went through this draw, and we were taking our time. We were going really slow, and we actually got within about 10 yards of a coyote, which was kind of cool because we're sitting there by the coyote, and the coyote has no idea that we're there, and he's watching the pronghorn as well. And then he finally looks over and he sees us, and he's like, oh, he kind of freaked out. And luckily he went back up the draw, so he didn't spook anything. But we ended up getting down, and CJ was able to get within about 75 yards and harvest that buck. But I mean, the stock was just so much fun, right? Like the process of having to make sure that you're staying low, you're staying out of that binocular vision that they've got so that you can get up on them was super cool. So fun.
And you remember, being a predator, just like that coyote was. You remember that part of the stalk, walking right up, and that coyote was sitting there, right? Mm-hmm. Or coyote, sorry, man. I guess that's the Easterner coming out and saying coyote. A coyote that's standing there, but coyote. But I mean, that's the fun part about stalking stuff. And I tell my son all the time, he got in a bad habit of wanting to jump out and scare me and his mom, in the house. He'd jump out, rah. I was like, what, Tucker, you can scare anybody if you startle them. I said, work on being a predator. I said, you want to be good, sneak up on me and just touch me without me knowing you're there. So that's what we've been working on the last couple of years is like, and he will come up to me and he'll reach out and he'll touch me and I won't have any ideas anywhere around. And I'll look at him, he's like, well, was I being a good predator, Dad? And I'm like, yes, you was. Yes, you was. But like that coyote there, you were doing the same thing he was. Mm-hmm. That's why we do it. I think that's why it's down something that we can't describe. The people that love the outdoors and love to hunt, it's just in us. It's in us as a species. I think that we are predators. I mean, I'll argue with anybody. We're predators, and when you're out in the field and you see another predator doing the same thing you're doing, and that coyote was very happy that y'all harvested that buck because I'm sure he cleaned that gut pile up pretty quick. So you really helped him out a lot. You made his job a whole lot easier. Of course, he wasn't going to get that buck anyway, I imagine. But yeah.
Well, it was interesting. We got that buck, went up to him, started to do the processing, and half of one of his front hooves was gone. And he was still moving pretty dang well, considering he was missing half of a front hoof. Those animals are just incredible. Like I'm just always blown away. Like I've seen different weird, things with pronghorn over the years where you're like, how in the world are they still running at like 30, 40 miles an hour? They can do it. It's incredible.
Yeah. Talking about them and other hunters, sometimes they, like I said earlier, they don't get the respect I don't think that they deserve, And you were talking about earlier before we started this about Randy Newberg.
Yep. He loves them.
Yeah, he loves them. I mean, and I don't like it when anybody kind of disrespects and it's just a pronghorn. No, I mean we're out here hunting, out here, harvesting, and is it time to start talking about how delicious?
Yeah,
these
let's do it.
Animals
Let's
are?
talk about eating them because that's my favorite part.
Man, yeah, of course, yeah. I mean, after the shot, let's have some steaks. And
I'm going to ask you. So when you shoot one and it hits the ground, what's the first thing you do?
First thing I do is depends on where I'm at, but I always, when I go pronghorn hunting, I have a cooler full of ice in my side-by-side or in my truck, because the only reason I'm not going to fill that tag is because I miss. Like, the tag is going to get filled. So go to the field expecting to fill that tag. Be prepared with a cooler full of ice. And the first thing I do, I'll usually skin them. When I first hunted them out here, I field dressed everything, right? I field dressed my first cow elk instead of just deboning it and leaving everything there, because I'm a whitetail hunter from Tennessee, and that's the first thing we did. It was just by habit. But now usually I'll start skinning them immediately on the ground, and I'll debone them right there. I'll quick quarter them. I'll skin them, and then I'll quick quarter most of the time, because I can throw all that in the cooler on the ice. I got a bigger size cooler. But my goal is, from the time that they hit the ground, they're on ice, and they're skinned and on ice in the cooler within an hour.
I'd say that's a perfect goal, and that's great advice. And if you want good pronghorn,
if you want any kind of good meat, I mean, you just can't ride around in your truck. It's September when a lot of these seasons start. It's late, it's mid September, early October, and back in Tennessee, when we didn't have real cold winters anyway. I mean, we have cold snaps, but we didn't ever hang animals in our garage, right? But I've seen, people in Wyoming hang them in September and October, because that's what they do with their elk in November and December. And I just don't think it does the meat any justice. So when I come out here, my Wyoming buddies, I'll actually kind of brine them. I'll put them in ice and salt water in a cooler and let them set for 3 or 4 days. I do it with all my meat: elk, deer, antelope, everything. Instead of hanging them, it's really just a brine. Is what I'm doing. And they kind of made fun of me at first until I invited them over to my house to eat some of this wild game that I've harvested. And they're like, "This is the best mule deer," or "This is the best elk," or "This is the absolute best pronghorn I've ever had." And so it's all about preparation and how you take care of it. I think just being prepared. Have that confidence. Have the confidence that you're going to fill that tag and have that cooler full of ice with you.
You taught me something. I had not thought about the salt in the water. That's a great idea.
Yeah. I think a true brine is sugar and salt, right, David? And it's sugar and salt. I usually just put salt in there. I'll just pour a bunch and after a couple of days, if the water's pretty red, because that salt's helping to, draw some of that blood out of the meat, which is good. I mean, that's with anything. And so I'll drain the water out, add more salt and ice. And sometimes I'll actually put water in on top of it in that ice, so it's in a salty ice bath. So
I think one thing that comes to mind is there's a couple units in Alaska where you cannot debone the moose. You can quarter it. You can cut a quarter in half, but you can't cut the meat off the bone. And the thought process there is, when you actually cut into the meat, into the muscle tissue, you're interjecting bacteria. There's bacteria in the air, in your saliva, on your knife. It's just there, right? And so by just taking and quick quartering and having that whole chunk of meat with the bone inside it, right, you're actually doing a better job of preserving. Because on the outside, by putting it in that salt, you're killing all that bacteria.
right.
And so there's A, that's important. B, deer and elk, I'm not going to pack a cooler full of ice around because I may not get one today.
Right.
On an antelope hunt,
You're packing ice.
we're packing ice, because if we go out there with a buck tag and 2 doe tags in our pocket, you're gonna get one, guys. The hardest, what I've seen with non-residents is they get too excited and they shoot the first buck they see. They come around the corner like you guys. Oh, daylight, there's a buck. And when you were driving out here on your 20-hour drive, you guys must have been tired because you hadn't seen antelope yet, because they're everywhere, right?
Right.
If you've been driving at daylight, now same thing. You guys getting up there at 4:30, getting out there and sitting there in the dark waiting. I probably would have left the house about 7:30, 8 o'clock. And I've had a couple family members draw non-resident doe tags, and they're like, hey, we want to come hunting. We want to put in for them. I'm like, get a doe antelope tag right here around my house. We'll go for an afternoon and we'll cut it up and we'll send it home with you. And we've made jerky sticks and snack sticks, and right, we'll go get their antelope, process it, come home here, stick it in the fridge for a day, and then we'll butcher it up, grind it up, and I'll send them home with actual finished edible product. So for sure, all those things you said are spot on.
So one thing that I would have you do next time is leave some of that bone in, like either a hind quarter or something like
antelope,
that.
I usually leave the bone in.
And then slow cook that thing. Oh, man, that is amazing.
Actually, I've got one in my freezer, vacuum packed and seasoned already.
All right, let's do it.
Yeah, it was a doe tag that, at a distance, when an antelope's by itself, it's kind of hard to tell how big the animal is. Mm-hmm. And so it was a real small doe.
But I'll tell you what, those bone-in, like if you're going to just smoke that or slow roast it in a slow cooker or whatever, some of the best pulled meat you'll ever eat, right? I mean, it's just amazing when it comes off the bone. I don't know what it is about cooking stuff with the bone in, but man, it just makes it's great for like carnitas, so you want to like shred it up and make it into whatever.
It adds all that flavor to it, like a porterhouse, man. I'm a porterhouse steak. Give me a steak, I'll take a porterhouse.
I like porterhouse.
Okay, man, you can bring some to my house next time. I'll cook them. You bring them, I'll cook them.
I will say, good. Young cow elk backstrap is not as good as antelope backstrap. You put both of them on 100%. The smoker, make a little log out of them, however you want to prep them and season them. You cook them the same time, the same place, cut them up the same, and serve them. It's 9 to 10, 9 out of 1. I hand you 2 plates, and the antelope backstrap's always gone. Elk backstrap goes. But people are like, hey, you got any more of that antelope?
You're right.
It is better.
Well, since you breached the subject, everybody's going to be mad at you. Yes, it is my favorite game meat that I've ever had. Oh, I mean, I've had all of it. You have too.
And I think the people listening to this screaming, saying, "Oh, I think they've either there is something to the fact that if you run them really hard and then you wound them and get a bunch of lactic acid, adrenaline, and then finally finish them off. There's something to be said there. If you're not prepping them and putting them on ice, if you're throwing them in the back of the truck, gutted, and driving to the butcher and throwing it on the butcher's floor, and then they leave it there for 2, 4, 6 hours until they get to it, it's not going to be good. It's a 90-pound animal.
And the hide. You got to get that hide off because, it traps that heat and it just goes quick.
Yeah, they're insulated.
Yes.
They're insulated.
Well, that hollow hair I was talking about, they insulate great. That's why they don't have to have tons of fat on them, is they have that special hair. And it cooks the meat if you don't get it off.
Well, in the winter, you'll see them laying out in the prairie, wind blowing and snow, and like the only thing but a head sticking up out of the snowdrift where they're just under a big pile of snow out there. I mean, they're a hardy, and that's, we didn't talk about that yet, but we all live in Wyoming. We drive down these roads, elk and deer. They're up in the, the trees. They get down in timber. Not an antelope, man. They'll be laying out there in the all open sagebrush flat.
But you can find them I've found them at 9,000,
right,
10,000 feet up in the timber, all the way down to 4,000 down here in the sage.
But they can put up with those winters. They can put up with them 60-mile-an-hour winds and snowing and blizzard and negative temperatures, and they're just sitting there taking it. And I'm like, man, tough.
I grew up in Cheyenne, and I would watch that, man. You'd see them, they'd lay on the hillside, storm would roll in, it would snow, and you'd see these little lumps on the hillside that would get up, and it was, pronghorns covered with snow, and they'd trot off and do their thing, but they can survive some of the most hostile conditions.
Yeah, they don't like deep snow, and that's what hurt them this year in Wyoming. Deep snow gets them. They're made for these high desert, sagebrush flats, steppes and stuff.
Wind blown flats. Yeah.
They got to have places where the wind blows the snow off so they can get to their food source. That
Let's
deep
talk
snow
about
really
that
hurts
too,
them.
like what they're eating, because it's really interesting to me. I got to tell this funny story. So the guy that I'm actually named after, he's got a big ranch up by Newcastle, Wyoming, And he's been around antelope his whole life. You know, he's up in his 80s now. He's still ranching, by the way. He's tough. And he was arguing with a game and fish biologist about this. No offense, game and fish, but the biologist was like, "Oh man, yeah, those pronghorn don't eat anything but sagebrush and grass. They don't eat alfalfa. They don't eat this. They don't eat that." And he's looking at this guy like, "Are you out of your mind?" You know, because he knows. And so he was taking pictures of the pronghorn out eating the alfalfa and sending it to this guy, you know, just to prove a point. But I mean, they eat, you know, sagebrush in the winter for sure. Like, especially this winter. Right. If you looked at, we had 2 feet of snow on the ground, 18 inches to 2 feet of snow just about everywhere. The tops of the sagebrush was chewed off. And that was the deer, the antelope, you know, anything they could get to it was eating that off because that's all they could get to because it crusted over. It was hard. It was really hard for them to move around. And it was tough on them, but I've seen them eat just about anything. I mean, they're very opportunistic, and they can handle it.
Oh, yeah, they love alfalfa, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And we talking about how delicious they are. Now, I do think you get your doe tag and you find your rancher or farmer that's got an alfalfa field because they want them gone out of it, you know. And you shoot a doe or a buck antelope out of an alfalfa field that's been kind of using that as 30 to 40% of their diet. Yeah. It takes it to another level.
That was
good.
My last one. It was a little bit north of here under a pivot. Shot a nice buck out from under the pivot. And it had been out there, according to the rancher, all summer, you know, eating alfalfa. And boy, that was the best pronghorn I've ever eaten in my life.
I've seen them. They eat so much alfalfa they'll get to scours because I don't think it's real good for their digestive system. I mean, they love to eat it. I mean, it's like candy to them, I think. But I don't think it's real great for their digestive system.
Well, it's like putting a cow out there on green alfalfa. It's not great for their gut.
Right.
It can bloat them out and make them sick. But yeah, pronghorn I think are by far the best. You know, it's my favorite as far as big game. David, how about you?
That's going to sound a little pretentious, but I will tell you that Dall sheep is above antelope, then moose. And the only reason Dall sheep beats antelope, and yes, it's pretentious. I know you can't get it very often, but they have marbled fat in the meat. And so when you cook it out, it's a little more cattle-esque.
Oh, so you already have some thought out for after this podcast is over.
We'll dig around. There might be. I think it's long gone.
Oh, no. That would
I'm
be
sure it is.
worth its weight in gold, I'm sure.
If it's that good, you know it's gone. I mean, that's just the way it works.
But no, the one that I can get annually by far, and moose is better than elk and deer, and the lowest on the list is mule deer. I'm sorry, but it just, I'll take a corn-fed whitetail doe's pretty good, but not as good as moose, and antelope is better than moose for sure.
Yeah, if you had to rank them, for sure, I agree. I've never had Dall sheep, but yeah, my wife. So when I put in for tags every year, and when we moved out here, I was like, oh yeah, she's elk. You know, we're elk hunting, we're deer hunting. Blah, blah. So at this point now, we've been out here. You know, this is going to be 7 years in January, I think, and she's like, don't put me in for anything but pronghorn tags. So she loves to hunt them and she loves to eat them, and she's like, we are not filling a pronghorn tag. You know, we do not eat pronghorn tag sandwiches, you know, because she loves to eat them. She's like, I don't care if you get anything else, but let's try to get pronghorn tags. And we were lucky enough this year to draw a couple tags, so with all the cutbacks in them and stuff like that. So
I will say, growing up in Oregon, when you were lucky enough to get a tag and get it filled, I was cutting steaks off front shoulders. I was cutting steaks off of hocks. I was cutting steaks off anything that was, you know, big enough to make a steak out of. Anymore, Patrick's gave me a good tip of, I think I'm going to save some front shoulders for a whole little brine smoker roast. But pretty much, if you're having steak at my house, it's backstrap. Hams get turned into a couple different products, and then the rest is burger. We got 3 kids. We eat a lot of hamburger.
That's what we do. You know, I've got a 3/4 horsepower limb grinder. You know, excellent. Bought it when I come out here. And we moved out here. I said, I'm going to get me a good heavy-duty grinder. So me and my wife and son, we do it all in the kitchen. And, I mean, that's a whole other aspect to these hunts, to this. It's the whole thing that you do. It's just living, you know, and it's different than some people, and it's the same as some people, and it's just what we enjoy doing.
I think it's cool, and you'd agree with this. It's fun when you have your family together, and you're processing that as a family, because, like my kids, we cut and wrap, you know, so I'm not usually vacuum sealing much. And so, you know, you got that butcher paper there, you know, that you've wrapped up all nice and you got it taped shut. And then my kids draw like special things on there. So like this year with elk, they were drawing all kinds of stuff on there, and that's even more fun because you go to pull it out and you're like, oh, I remember when Katie drew this on there, Leah drew that, and you pull it out and you thaw it out and people are like, your kids did that? I was like, oh yeah. And then you show them pictures of you processing it, and I just think it's part of the culture here, and it's really cool.
It's just part of the experience. It's just part of the life of doing it, But yeah, processing it ourselves. We've always, we lived off of whitetails in Tennessee for the most part. Like Dave was talking about eating burger, So on a elk or a deer, of course all the back straps, that's steaks, and then I'll cut steaks out of the hams. But then almost all the front shoulders and a lot of the back hams, I'll just put into the grind pile, and we'll grind all that up for burger. And we don't mix any fat with our burger. We grind it straight. A lot of people put fat in it, and if you do, that's fine. But I never have. Now you can't patty a hamburger out of it and make a hamburger patty. But if I want a burger, I'll go buy me a pound of cow meat to make me a big old greasy
So
hamburger.
I got a solution for you there.
All right, what we got?
And the reason we don't put any fat in our burger anymore is it actually continues to degrade in the freezer, right? You can tell 6 months later if you've mixed fat in with your burger, it doesn't taste as good as if it's just clean, straight burger. So the easiest solution to fix this problem is get you a pound of burger, half a package of Ritz crackers, and an egg or two. Mix that egg and that cracker in there. That'll act as a binder to hold the meat together. It's not quite cow patties, but it's enough to hold it together where you can fry and have a burger. And it's not that hard to crack two eggs. And
sounds like that's going to be good with the doll sheep we're going to have after this podcast.
I'm all for it, man.
But yeah, the grind, and so, but antelope, my grind pile on an antelope, I try to make as small as possible. I cut as many steak, kebab, antelope fajitas. So the rib meat in between the ribs. Tucker loves cutting that rib meat. Of course, it's not much. I mean, you clean out both sides of the ribs and you have enough for one meal of antelope rib meat fajitas. But they're fantastic. I mean, they're already in the strips, and we fry them up and put some seasoning on them, and they're just fantastic.
But to your point, there's years we get multiple tags here. I won't brag at how many, but we're gonna just set up a production line. We set up a couple card tables. We got the grinder, we got the vacuum packer, and we get all the kids, and I hand them knives, right? I hand the 3-year-old a sharp knife and say, don't cut yourself, and have fun and go to town, right?
We actually got Tucker one of those cut-proof gloves. That's just like idea. Slides on the the non-knife hand. And I liked it so much, I ended up buying me a pair of them to put in my kill kit for elk hunting, because, when you're trying to hurry up, especially if you're in bear country or something like that, you kind of get in a rush sometimes, or if it's cold, and you can't feel what you're doing when your hands are cold sometimes.
I've got the tip of a couple different fingers, a couple different times with the I've got the Outdoor Edge change a blade, and that thing is wicked sharp.
You got to watch those Outdoor Edge ones. I've got, what's them other change a blade ones with the scalpel blades in them, whatever. Havilon.
Yeah.
I got a Havilon a couple of years ago, and I like it.
I keep breaking those blades.
Yeah.
Any side pressure and ding.
Well, and the other problem with it is sometimes swapping them out. To swap out on them, you almost have to have a multi-tool to swap once you get to, meat and stuff on it. So I don't know, good old buck knife, fixed blade buck knife on your side's just about as good as anything, I think, But
it's always good to have a sharp knife, no matter what you're doing, especially when you're processing. But I think all of us have stabbed ourselves once or twice with a skinning knife.
My favorite processing knife, y'all are going to laugh, is the old wood-handled fillet knife, fish fillet knife. Rapala.
Oh, no, yeah.
I know several people have done that.
I forgot what the name of that company was before Rapala bought them out. But anyway, I've got a wood-handled fillet knife, and it is my go-to knife. I mean, I usually have it in my pack when I'm elk hunting because it's so good about, deboning and stuff like that. But I mean, I use it all the time. And I've got an Alaska Knife Company Ulu sharpener that is on that leather sheath that they come in. And you can run that thing through it twice, and she's back as sharp as a scalpel and back at it again. So I'm a fillet knife guy for.
I like it for big game too. Yeah, I like to use it on the hams. If you're taking the bone out.
Yep.
The fillet knife works really well. You can get in right along that bone, cut right through those, sinewy tissues.
Yep.
I think they work as good as anything.
Yeah.
Once we get done deboning using some sort of deboning knife, I really like the Victorinox fillet knife, the one I take to Alaska filleting fish with. I sharpen that thing up, and I can go through, especially the grind pile, and I can just strip that sinew right out real fast on a cutting board, just like you would fillet a fish. Yep. And we don't even waste that. Dog loves that pile.
Well, yeah, my golden retriever loves it, but I've noticed it backs her up a little bit. So I have to be careful. So there's two things that I've learned not to feed my golden retriever to, and Ruby, she's at the house, but anyway, is too much sinew or beaver meat. Oddly enough, it doesn't sit well with her. So when I'm cutting up beaver, y'all ever ate beaver? We're way off the pronghorn at this point. But beaver meat's really good too. But I mean, don't feed it to your dog or mine anyway. It don't sit well with her.
Well, when you're processing for the dogs, there's a couple things you got to remember. One, it can back them up, right? All your scraps. I throw them in the oven, cook them, and then I feed them to the dogs.
You cook them for your dogs, man.
I do that because, well, I'll explain here more in a minute, but it helps them not get backed up as much. But the bad part about it is you feed a dog so much of that, you can get what we call green gas floating around your house because they get really gassy.
You talking about Molly?
Oh, yeah, Molly, the Bernese Mountain Dog, yes. She can have some of the worst gas you've ever smelled in your life if you feed her too much of that. We are way off the Pronghorn subject at this point. But if you are going to do it for your dogs, if you do cook it, it does help with the backup issue a little bit, but it does not help with the gas
She just
issue.
sits there next. I have a 5-gallon bucket sitting next to my kitchen island, and then Ruby's right next to the 5-gallon bucket. So the pure sinew goes in the bucket, and if it's a good meat scrap, I'll have to throw her some every now and then, just to keep her interested.
She's a good dog.
I always just throw the rib cage out in the dog kennel anymore too. Once we're done with getting straps and loins and stuff off of it, and towards the end of season, I notice the dog just doesn't care anymore about meat. Like, yeah, whatever. But we don't buy dog food for at least a month during the hocks, 100%.
Oh, yeah.
Leg bones.
Give Ruby the leg bones. I think it's the first year we was out here, and we harvested our first cow elk, me and Lisa both, and I give Ruby one of the cow elk legs with the foot still on. I still had the foot on it. And I left the house, and I went to come back in, and we have a dog door coming into the house, and I looked down, and that cow elk leg was half in the dog door and half out. The hoof was just hung where she had tried to take it back in the house because they didn't want her chewing on it in the house, but she got hung in the dog door with that cow elk leg. And I kind of looked at it, and I think we'd been out here about a year, and I said, that looks like I live in Wyoming now with a cow elk leg hanging out the dog door.
Have you ever been to Murdoch's or one of those ranch stores and you find like the cow femurs that they smoke up and you can buy them and they're vacuum sealed? I did that with that cow elk last year for Molly and for Johnny, my other dog, and they love those, man. I mean, that's another thing you can do with the femur bones is throw them in the smoker when you're smoking something else, and it smokes up real nice, and then, you can cut them in half and they can get to the marrow.
The only thing I despise is, in the fall I give her multiple quarters in her kennel, and she's got a big kennel, but they migrate out into the yard, and then when I'm running the lawnmower around, I find them, and she really loves them once the lawnmower hits them because then it shatters them into pieces. And she get into that marrow. So
yeah, the insurance company? How did you break your windshield? A piece of a doll sheep leg went through my windshield.
Yeah,
that would be pretty weird, wouldn't it? Get that call if you were the
that
insurance
might make one of them insurance commercials where they talk about the crazy stuff that happens.
Yeah, exactly.
You call your insurance company, man, I've run into an animal. Oh, what'd you hit? A fish.
you might be a redneck if.
Yeah, right. Right, for sure.
But yeah, I think to get back to the pronghorns, I think probably one of the coolest things about them living here in Wyoming, right? Especially for the people that live here, is that, other than after this last winter, they are fairly plentiful, and they're great to get your kids out on their first hunt. My daughter and I, we put in for them. She's gonna hunt for her first time. We didn't get a tag, but we did get a late season cow elk tag, so hopefully we can make that as enjoyable as possible. Not kill her on that hunt.
We got a good spot.
Yeah. So
you don't want to make it too easy, but you don't want to make it so hard that they lose interest too. That's a fine line to walk, right? When you start talking about starting kids off hunting, because Tucker turned 10 this year, and he's got a couple of years, and he was talking about, we did a hike this past week. You saw it on Facebook, and
so cool.
Yeah, it was that would be a whole nother podcast talking about that kind of stuff. But we was coming out, and he said, Dad, when I get a cell phone, the first app I'm going to download is OnX. And I was like, oh, there's an OnX hit right there. But anyway, but yeah, I mean, that's a game changer for hunting and really any outdoor activity. I use it all the time, hiking, fishing, hunting. I mean, what a game changer that's been. But yeah, he's like, first app I'm going to get. He's like, can I have your old cell phone and take pictures with? And I was like, yeah. He's like, can I download OnX? I'm like, no, it's not hooked up to anything. You can't download. But yeah.
I think you could save some online maps off of that thing.
Yeah.
Hook it to Wi-Fi real quick, and he could at least have the map there.
Yeah.
I used OnX yesterday looking for firewood, trying to make sure I got the right road into the unit. Right.
Oh, right.
It's now. I pre-OnX, you had to do a little bit of legwork, right? And you could find some spots that, even bank fishing, right? You could find spots that people didn't know were there, and you could get away from the crowds. And now it's kind of it's highlighted neon flashing, go here, and it kind of ruins some spots in some ways.
That's what that Mule Creek Junction spot. Like I said, we went back a couple of. We drew the tag I guess it was last year we drew that tag. And we went back, and because I had some friends from Tennessee that put in for it, so we put in for it. And when you put in for tags, you can't party hunt if you have with non-residents and residents. I don't know if anybody knows that, but you can't have non-residents and residents in the same party, so you have to actually put in separate. And they didn't draw, and I had it as my third choice, and I drew it because it's a fairly easy tag to draw over that area. And so me and my wife and Tucker went over there, and I filled mine. She unfortunately missed her shot, but it was tough hunting. It was real tough hunting over there, and it was like every pull off there was like 3 trucks at every pull off, and I was like, yep, this is OnX has kind of got to, but that's okay. I mean, that's fine. It's just that's a part of the state that it's a lot less public land over there.
But you can make an antelope hunt as difficult or as easy as you want, right? You can't do that with an elk hunt. You've got to put the work in, and it's if you're wanting to just road hunt an elk, you're most likely not going to fill the tag.
Well, and even if you do fill an elk tag on a road hunt, you might fill the tag, but you're going to be unfulfilled, in my opinion. I mean, the part of the draw of the elk hunt is, you get a lot of meat off of them for sure, but it's the challenge, it's the push, it's the pushing yourself, it's the, that type of stuff. Pronghorn hunt, it's not. I mean, like you just said, you can make it challenging if you want to, and making it archery hunting. Yeah. Oh,
it's huge. What I love about the archery hunting antelope specifically, and not spot and stock, just building blinds, is I'll go out. If I had had a tag, I'd been out June and July looking for antelope, right? Finding my target buck, and then getting on OnX, finding the closest 2 or 3 water holes, building blinds on those, or building decoys to scare them off of the other ones. And
now,
what's really fun.
I'm going to interrupt you on that. Building decoys to scare them off of the other ones. Would they not get used to anything you put?
Scarecrow. Take a pair of coveralls. So if I have a water hole that's I'm going to hunt that I build the blind on and they've shied away, and they go to another water hole that's less desirable, but they're still there. The day I'm going to hunt, I'll put up
the day that you hunt. You just won't leave it up. Yeah,
but I take a PVC pipe, duct tape it together in the shape of a cross, and put a pair of coveralls and a milk jug on top of it. In the dark, I'll go put that up, and then we'll go get another blind. And a lot of times, we're talking 2 water holes that are 400 yards apart, right?
Right.
And so they're gonna have gotten habituated to. They were going to the primary. I built the blind. They started using a secondary, right? For 2 or 3 weeks, my blind's been sitting there. They're going the other one. I'll run over there, or you can park a pickup on that other one. Kind of forces them to go to the.
Well, anybody that's still listening to this podcast at this point, you should take a pen and paper and write that. That's a good little gem you just come up with there. I like that.
That's a good one.
It works really well, and what's really you'll see an increase of antelope on your blind that day. Now, obviously, you're going to move your pickup or take your scarecrow down, but it's cool to get to go pick your target buck, find the water hole, crawl in there, and usually in the headlight. But I take kids with cameras, and we sit there, and we'll sit till a lot of times what you'll see, especially August, because openers tomorrow, is the buck is going to come in with the does, and he'll be tending those does, but he's not going to water in the morning. And then he'll go bed those does somewhere close, maybe even 200-300 yards away. They'll come in from 600-700 yards, mill around, feed on their way in. All the does will drink. He'll usually stand about 100 yards off and defend the harem from other bucks. They'll take off. Sometimes they only go 400 or 500 yards, and they'll all bed down early afternoon. He'll come in solo, usually between noon and 2, and leave the does. And they're close enough that he can see and run over there. So you'll have to sometimes sit all day to get your target buck, but it is pretty awesome to go drive around, spot and scope all these bucks. Nobody else is out there, and you go, that's the buck I want to kill. And then you got to, it's a lot more work. And that's like what I said. You can make this as hard or as easy as you want. You can just wait till rifle season and drive around, and the first legal buck that runs in front of the truck, you can get out and shoot him. Or you can spot and stock archery. I haven't quite done that yet, just because I've been taking my oldest Hunter, and he's now 10. But I took Hunter and his younger brother when his brother was 1.5 years, and we got a buck, 5 and 1.5-year-old in the blind. And guys that say that archery is not lethal, at GoPro footage of one of the bucks that we looked at earlier, he lived 9 seconds. It was an 18-yard frontal shot. Arrow, broadhead skewered him and went all the way to the hind quarter, right? So he had that much fletching, about 3-4 inches of fletching sticking out. He lived to 9 seconds from when the arrow hit him to when he tipped over. I mean, and he turned around and looked back at the water like, what just happened? And done.
Down he went.
So I like to go out there when there's nobody else out there and take my pick of the bucks. But to the same point, my dad killed a 85-inch goat last year, 2 or 3 days before the end of season. With it, it wasn't no special hiking. It wasn't no private land. It was just public land on the side of the road. And what had happened is somebody had harvested a buck earlier in the season off of those does.
Right.
And a buck from deeper out came in and was tending those does.
like
and
we
it
were
was a
talking
lot
about earlier.
bigger buck.
Yeah.
So,
Well, yeah, that my best pronghorn buck that I shot, it was actually the COVID year. I guess it was 2020. And we was over there camping at Bass Lake with some friends. And Lisa had a tag, my wife. And she got up at like 5 o'clock. She's like, I do not feel good. I got to go to the house. Well, she had COVID. I hate to say the C word on the podcast, but anyway, that's what she ended up having. So she had to go back, and our friends, they had to be on quarantine or whatever, all that mess with. But me and my buddy Chris got up, and he had a doe tag for the same area. And I was like, well, I'll go with you. So we got up and went after whitetails. And where we went, it's pronghorn kind of live everywhere, but where we went, it was a creek drainage, and I wasn't really expecting to see a pronghorn down off in there. And we had a few does come by that didn't give us a shot, and whitetail does. And I looked over, and it was really foggy. I sent you the pictures of that buck. It was really foggy.
So
and I
cool.
said, there's a pronghorn over there. And I looked, and like he was about, my rangefinder picked up one time at 300 yards, and I was looking at him. And I said, I can't, in the fog, it was right at daylight, and as it started getting lighter, the fog rolled in. And I said, I can't tell, when he turns sideways, he doesn't look very big, but when he looks at me, he looks pretty big, but at that distance it was hard to tell in the conditions. And I looked at Chris and I said, man, what do you think? And he said I don't know. He's looking for whitetails, he said, I don't he said, I can't tell how big he is either. And I said, well, I don't really care. I said, I tell you what, your kids, his 2 kids, and Tucker was back at the camper. I said I'm gonna go ahead and harvest him. I said, because they'll get a kick out of it. We'll shoot him, and we'll go back and get them, and we'll let them come up here and find him and everything. It was a nice cool morning. And so I went to range him to shoot him, and I actually had my wife's 6.5 pink camo Howa Creedmoor, and I went to range him, and my rangefinder said 2 yards. I went, well, I guess the fog has got my rangefinder. I was like, well, he was about 300 earlier, and so I shot, and Chris was watching him, and I squeezed the trigger, and like as soon as it went off, he's dead. Like he just immediately went down, And but we went back, got the kids. And I knew he went down, I knew where he went, so we was 2 miles from the kids, so we went back and got them and come back up there and let them have the excitement of finding. Like, have you been to him? No, we ain't been to him yet, And we went up there, and when we got to him, I looked at Chris and he looked at me, and both of our eyes shot out. I was like, this is the biggest pronghorn I've ever harvested. And this was a real nice buck. He ended up scoring 80 or 81, something like that, and it was it's fantastic. It was a lot of fun. But the kids, they just got a big kick out of it. But, I'm when I looked at my tags this time, and I had elk and mule deer and pronghorn. And when I opened it up, and successful. All right, well, I got the 2 general tags for the deer and elk. I'll get generals for them, but got that pronghorn tag, because for the people that still listening, I mean, all pronghorn, there's no over-the-counters even for residents in Wyoming. It's all limited quota. So we can get a general deer or general elk tag for certain areas in the state over-the-counter, but we cannot buy any over-the-counter pronghorn tags. So it's strictly managed here, and I think that's why it is, in my opinion, as far, maybe not for trophies, I don't know, but I mean, as far as hunting and harvesting a pronghorn, I think Wyoming's the spot in the world to go. I mean, period. So
I would agree with that. I mean, you could argue Montana a little bit and a few other states, but I mean, Wyoming's got the density of the population and the big ones, so
and the public land to chase them on.
Yep. Well, cool, man. It's been fun. Is there anything else on pronghorns we haven't covered? I mean,
man, I don't know. We kind of went down a few rabbit trails, or pronghorn trails, whatever you want to say. But,
speed goat trails.
I do have a couple tricks on how to field judge them.
There you go. Let's hear them.
Now, okay, well, I'll tell you mine because I only have one. So when people say, how do I tell it? Well, you want the prong to come off above the tip of the ear. When their ears are standing up, you want that prong to come off of the horn above the tip of the ear. If it's below that, it's a juvenile buck. I mean, it's a smaller one. And then, well, I guess I have two. And the other one is if you're looking at mass, the base of the horn compared to their eye, you want it at least twice the thickness or the width of their eye at the base of that horn. But other than that, it's just, you kind of look at them like, is that one I want to harvest? Yes or no? And if the answer is no, drive a half mile down the road and find you another one,
Yep.
Yeah, same as you said, is their ear is 6.5, 7 inches. So if the prong is coming off below that ear, they're sub 12-inch goats. They're little. A big goat's 17 inches tall from the base all the way around. An average goat is 14. A small goat is 12 and under. And there's kind of when I'm driving around looking, and this came from Joe Bartlett with Blue Creek Outdoors, he's a dink, right? Or, that's a pretty good representative of an antelope. You might want to think about shooting him. Or, holy cow, Batman, shoot that goat now. I haven't seen a bigger one, right? And those correlate with a 60, a 70, and an 80 plus, right? As you get into the 85, 88, 89, I do know of a 91 and 5/8 that got harvested in the state, and it's a goat. I mean, it's a goat. But you're 100% correct. And their eye is 1.5 inches, almost 2 inches. So you want the base of the prong right above their eye to double the size of their eye. You want that prong to come off above their ear, and you want that prong to be as long as the base of the horn, right? And then you want them to have, when you're looking above the prong, you want them to carry that mass. So mass more like a thumb or a cigar, not your pinky or a pencil, right? So they're real skinny up top and they just peter out and they don't hook around. I mean, if you want that goat, great, harvest him. But if you're looking to get a representative, you want to double the horn above. So from where that prong is, if that's 6 inches and you have 50% more horn above it, he's about 12 inches, right? So if they come off with that prong as 1 inch or 1.5 inches or even 2 inches above the ear, and they're twice the width of their eye, and they got big cutters, and they look like they got cigars on top of their head that curl around, ivory tips almost touch,
Shoot them.
Hey, you're looking at an 80-plus inch goat.
About halfway through that description that you had, I've already got the safety off.
Yeah.
I'm already putting pressure on the trigger halfway through that description.
Shoot them.
Well, we looked at one. My dad shot one where his prong was 1 inch or so below his ear on one side, 1 inch or so above his ear on the other. He's a weird freak goat.
Yeah, you showed me that one earlier.
He's like 82, 83.
When you pulled those sheaths, because if you do a European mount, you can just set the sheaths on the bony cores of those horns. And David was showing me this goat and before this podcast, and he pulled one off and he handed it to me, and then he pulled the other one off, and I'm thinking to myself, these are two different goats that he's put these sheaths on the same head, but this was the same goat. But when you take them off, the sheaths don't look hardly anything like each other. I've seen a lot of pronghorn out here, and I've never seen one that really looked like that.
So that's Dad's goat, and my dad, non-resident, he's drawn more goat tags than I have as a resident. I'm getting kind of tired of it, but it is exciting when he comes, and we go on a 2 or 3 day, usually 2 or 3 afternoon drive around, look at goats, and I go, yeah, it's a goat. you want him, take him, or that's a pretty good one. You might think about it, or holy cow, Batman, shoot.
Yeah.
That buck, he was laying basically facing west, and then he was laying facing east. When he was facing west, we were looking at that shorter, quote unquote, side, and I was like, yeah, he's all right. He's just a goat. I mean, he's a good goat, but I'm like, if you want him. Dad shot and missed him. The next day, we're driving back along that spot. Here's another goat that I thought laying 100 yards from that spot with the same does facing the other direction. And I'm like, holy cow, you need to shoot that. And he shot and harvested. And I walk up and I go, that's the same goat from yesterday. Because when you looked, you saw that he had such a disparity in the prong heights on that buck.
You're talking about when you walk up to them, they have such a unique smell. And
They do.
And some people don't like. I think it's cool smelling, but like
it's pungent or strong. It's different.
It's stout. I mean, they got a musk to them, but I mean, I like it. I think it's a neat smell. But you're talking about like if that's a goat, you can whatever a goat's a goat, like on an average size. Well, I told Lisa that she drew her buck tag and I was like, hey, I'll try to find you a pretty decent one. She's like, I'm going to shoot the first mature buck that I see. If it's not a juvenile buck, I'm going to shoot the first buck I see because we're putting meat in the freezer. I'm not waiting, So she is strictly after the meat, and I love her for it. She likes to go. And Tucker's so funny. So this year, because he's 10 now, I'm going to let him be her hunting guide. I'm going to sit back. I'm not going to do anything, but Tucker, you tell me what to do. You're guiding Mom in on her pronghorn, and
that's awesome.
It's some of these things I probably should film, but then I don't want to live with a camera in my face all the time, and
don't ruin the experience.
Nah, so I'm just it'll be fun. It'll be a fun trip.
You do need to capture some of it for posterity's sake, but filming a hunt it cheapens it.
Yeah.
The hunt. Now, later years down the road when you can look back on some of that. Yeah. And my wife, to the same credit, she's the same way and drives me nuts, right? She'll draw a tag, and she's drawn 4 buck tags to my every one, right? So I get excited when she's got an antelope tag. I'm like, oh, I'll find you a big one. We're going to find a big one. She's like,
I don't
know. I'm going to shoot the first legal. And the last time we
That's the way Lisa is. It's the same way.
We crawled all over this mine. I'm like, no, don't shoot that one. We find better. Finally, she's like 5th or 6th decent buck that was in range, and she's like, I'm shooting him. I'm like, okay, I guess it's the best I've come up with this afternoon. And she keeps going on one afternoon antelope hunts, but we take a kid along, and it's a great time. To your point though, and you said this earlier in the podcast, trusty Rusty, right? These guys that are gonna go on a hunt, they draw this tag, I gotta get a new rifle.
Don't do it.
I've seen elk fall to a 243, and I would rather have somebody show up with a 243, put 90 grain nozzler partitions, and say, hey, I can shoot 250 yards. That's max. Even on an elk hunt, I'd rather you show up with that rifle and know it in and out and can shoot it accurately than go buy a 300 Win Mag or a 338 Lapua and you can't even hit the broadside of a barn at 100 yards with it.
Yeah, I mean, tag driver, it's about shot placement. It's not about, and I think when people, sometimes when they get those bigger guns, I don't know if they feel like, well, it's a bigger gun, I don't have to be as accurate. Hopefully nobody consciously thinks that, but yeah, bring the gun that you, like, if it was like, all the stuff went haywire and you had to leave your house with one weapon to defend you and your family, it's going to be the most accurate one you got. Which one are you grabbing? Mm-hmm. That's the one you take. Right?
Beware of the one rifle man, right?
Right.
And if you get a caliber, 243 6.5 Creedmoor will definitely do the job. If you're going to look at a 1 caliber rifle, there's a bunch in that 270, 30-06, 308, and Jack O'Connor, London, those guys, they hunted around the world with those calibers.
Yeah.
And so you don't need to get up into the...
You don't have to have the belted magnums, you don't have to have them.
No.
But
I've killed every big game animal that I've ever killed on the same Model 77 Ruger 270. That thing is a great gun.
That's what I started hunting. I've still got it, a Ruger 243 M77. I've had it for a long time.
They're great guns.
And I got a straight 6 Redfield scope on top of it. That my dad gave me that gun, and I parted ways with it for a few years and ended up getting it back from my cousin. But yeah, it's a tack driver, and it's funny. One of the pronghorn does that I killed. First couple of years we were out here, we were in a field, and before we left, and Tucker was younger, I guess 7 or 8. Before I left the house, and I they kind of opened up the gun safe. I was like, Tucker, what gun you want me to take? He's like, take that one, because he'd never seen me hunt with that 243. I was like, okay. So I grabbed that 243 and we went and shot a doe, and I actually shot her in the neck using my shot placement and putting them down. And this was in an alfalfa field, and to this day, she was probably the best tasting wild game animal I have ever harvested. And I actually shoot for antelope, for light game. I actually shoot a 85 grain Sierra hollow point out of that 243. It's rough on deer or antelope size critters for sure.
I'm loading 60 grain in my 22 250. Yeah. And when I have one of the family members come, and it's legal here, is way too small for mule deer, way too small for, now, whitetail does at close range, right, great medicine. But antelope out to, my cousin, he came and he drew his first doe tag, and I told him he now needs to go get his own rifle when he comes the next time. But he borrowed this 22 250, and I mean, we're talking, it's hand loaded, and it's 5 shots under a quarter at 100 yards, right? Right. Bull barrel, it's a nice. It's just a Remington 22 250, but with the hand loads, it's a nice gun, and I'd probably recommend more 243 than that gun, but it still will do the job. And he missed a couple antelope in the 200-yard 250, and I had a doe tag in my pocket, and he was kind of mumbling something about the gun. The antelope had run out there at about 400 yards, and I said, "Give me that gun." I took it, I ranged him, picked a doe and dropped her right there. I'm like, "It's not the gun, buddy," and handed it back to him right after he just got done. And we were belly crawling in our sagebrush around here, which is sometimes not much bigger than a water bottle. Right. And we're crawling into where I'm seeing the backs of these in range, and okay, they're like 220, 220. I'm like, we set the bipod up, and I'm like, okay, now you just need to, when the sagebrush parts and you could see one, put it right behind the shoulder and shoot her. Shoot, miss. I'm like, I don't know. So definitely bring the gun that you're comfortable and confident with.
And like you said, bipod. Bipod's very important on these antelope hunts, because I've got a 13 to 26 Harris fixed, not pivoting bipod, but a fixed bipod, and it stays on my rifles all the time. I mean, that's a game changer on any kind of shot over really 100 yards. Really, I mean, you want to have that bipod. So that's another suggestion. Before you come out here, put a bipod on your gun and be ready to use it and know how to use it.
Predator hunting, open country, coyote hunting, antelope hunting, wind. We use a bipod. Sometimes, like Patrick and I went out to a spot, and we were watching a creek for whitetail. I hauled the lead sled out. When we took a kid, I laid the rifle on the lead sled where I'd seen the deer coming. I'm like, it's going to be right there, right? However, what I've found on mount goat hunts, Dall sheep hunts, even elk hunts, I don't like having that bipod there. It sometimes could be marginally useful. What I found is a really simple trick. I always take trekking poles. Mm-hmm. If you take both wrist straps and slide them over the opposing handles and shrink them down, you can make a pretty quick homemade tripod right there in the field. And that has played a big game-changing role in Dall sheep hunts and mountain goat hunts and elk hunts. Is if we're going to extend the range past kind of zero distance, if it's zero distance, I rest on a tree or a knee and take a shot. If we're going to extend the range a little bit.
What do you mean by zero distance is what you're going to zero at, like 200, 250. You know, 200 for a short action, 250 for a long action magnum.
Yep.
That's what I slide them in at for me anyway.
So if we can't get on like a backpack and get that rifle rested steady because of the hill and the terrain, or we need to raise the elevation of the muzzle, that makes a really nice steady rest when we're getting into the 350, 400. Now, I don't shoot further than that, and long range guys can say what they want. I've just found when I shoot something at 300, it's game over. 400 is usually fine if we take our time. If it's sub 200, it's harvested too. But when I get past 400 or 500 yards, then it starts to be a question mark. And I can shoot 4 or 5 inch group with most of my firearms on the lead sled at the range at home. You start adding in, you're breathing heavy, you're excited. Wind, dynamic movement of you and the animal. Shorten that yardage up a little bit and increase your odds of success.
Right. Yeah. Right. See, this is just loaded with good tips on hunting. So if people are still listening, they're like, man, I learned a lot today. I didn't know I could use my trekking poles for a bipod. But I mean,
you have them with you.
There's lots of great things. Yeah. I mean, you look at what you have with you and how do you use it. I mean, that's just a basic principle when you're out hunting. Just like A great rest is your pack. You know, if you got your pack, throw it on the ground, lay down, and make a good shot.
Adapt and overcome. That's just what the adventure's about, for sure.
Yeah, but I think it's really cool that we did a speed goat episode. I also call them prairie rockets because I think that's a pretty cool name.
There's some non-endearing names out there.
Is.
We're not
There
going to perpetuate those.
Those people can have those names, but prairie rocket, speed goat, you know.
And once again, like I said, I was up there at 10 Sleep Brewery drinking their Speed Goat Golden Ale, which it's my number one beer. Any beer drinkers out there, stop in 10 Sleep and get you one. But yeah, that's where I was at when I found out about this job out here and changed my life, changed my wife and son's life too.
Are you going back?
To 10 Sleep?
No.
To Tennessee?
To visit, right?
To visit. Yeah. Lisa says no. Lisa says no.
Well, we're happy to have you.
She go visit, but
yeah.
But I tell people that Tennessee's got my heart, but Wyoming's got my soul. Yeah, I love it out here. It's just fantastic.
Another reason you can't leave is Lisa loves my dog Molly, so we can't do that to her.
That is true.
That would be bad.
That is true. Yeah.
Well, John, it's been great having you on, man, and hopefully people will be inspired to go check out pronghorn. I mean, they are one of the coolest animals on the planet.
Yeah, I mean, I tell any non-resident, or I mean, residents in Wyoming, they grew up hunting them just like you, right? But any non-resident listening, start doing a little bit of research. Start putting in for preference points. You know, you can get a good area with 4 or 5 pronghorn preference points with a lot of public land. I say start putting in for it. Start doing a little bit of research. And you won't have to be worried about coming home empty-handed. Like you'll be successful on this hunt, and it'll be a good time. It's not stressful. The weather's not terrible, you know, unless you decide to go on opening day when the wind is awful, like we did. But we didn't know, you know, this is just inexperience. But
you can find antelope from Oregon to Dakotas, down to New Mexico, Arizona, all the way up to Montana. So definitely, if you're not,
there's lots of options. But I would say Wyoming has the most by far. And I don't know. There's just something special about this state and hunting them here. So
that's something special about hunting this state, period. You know, me and my buddy Chris has talked about, you know, going to do a coos deer in Arizona or something like that. I'm like, man, Chris, we live in like the place that everybody that calls himself a hunter in the world knows Wyoming for hunting, right? They want to hunt here. Right, David? Wouldn't you say that's true?
When I had to move down from Alaska, which is probably a close second, you know, we looked at 3 states, and I'll say what they are: Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and Wyoming won out. And I'm 100% glad. I mean, we've been here right at a decade now. Yeah. Next year, 11 years now. So I don't, you know, Alaska might still have my heart a little bit. Just a little bit. Yeah. Wyoming's got my soul.
Yeah. It's a unique place, and it's not for everybody. I'll say that. It wouldn't be for everybody, but me and my family really feel at home here. We really do.
Well, and you're a great part of the community, so I'm glad you're here too. And we got to go fishing again at some point. So.
Let's go.
All right.
I mean, let's go this afternoon. I got a good hint on some brown trout on caddis flies. We'll probably go get them right here at dark. You want to go catch a 20-inch brown before dark?
I like catching 20-inch browns anytime. You know that, though.
I know you do.
All right, guys. Well, we'll come back again with another episode of Radcast Outdoors. If you want to go back, you can listen to John's first episode. It's a little ways back, and we talk about Boysen State Park and a whole bunch of other stuff. But thanks again for listening. Again, we've got listeners all over the country and even outside this country. So thanks for listening. Thanks again for listening to the Radcast Outdoors podcast. We hope that you've enjoyed the show. If so, please go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to this podcast and subscribe, share, and give us a 5-star rating, which really helps other people find the show. You can find all of our shows, recipes, giveaways, videos, and much more at radcastoutdoors.com. While you're there, please help support the show by purchasing a Radcast Outdoors shirt or hat. Please don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We also have a Radcast community on Facebook called Radcast Nation, and we'd love for you to join in the conversation there. And of course, please help support our sponsors who make this show possible. Thank you again to PK Lures, Bow Spider, and High Mountain Seasonings. Until next time, get out there and enjoy the outdoors.